Is black and white for you, or are you a color vision person? I've got the Boox Note Air3 and the Boox Note Air3 C here, and we're going to do a bit of a side-by-side. Let's go ahead and get the technical differences out of the way. First of all, the black and white screen is 227 pixels per inch and has no BSR. And BSR is Boox Super Refresh technology. You'll see there it has to do a full screen refresh to remove the image retention, whereas the Boox Note Air3 C actually removes the ghosting or that image retention without having to do that full screen refresh. The color screen is 300 pixels per inch with its black and white layer and 150 pixels per inch with its color layer, and it does have this BSR. You can see there where ghosting was, it has now disappeared, but it's still retained here on the non-BSR device. Because of that, they have different sort of screen modes, but I've gone for something similar, which is the speed mode on the black and white version and a fast mode here. Let's go into normal and balanced, which are the two sort of equivalent screens. And you can see here it chooses to do a full screen refresh to remove that once you scroll, whereas the BSR screen just removes that without having to do so. I pretty much only ever use balanced here on the Note Air3 C, whereas I do have to choose between the two here, whether I want it to act in this speed mode here, which is perfectly fine for scrolling, and the ghosting is pretty well controlled, but it isn't perfect. Apart from that, they've got the same pen, they've got the same RAM, they've got the same storage, they're the same size, they have the same case exactly. They're pretty much the same device, except to say the black and white version is $100 cheaper, and that might make your mind up for you if you don't really need the color. So let's look at how big of a difference the color and the BSR technology make to your everyday use of the device. There is a big advantage to the black and white books over the color BSR, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So firstly, the BSR, how big of a deal is that? I really think that it makes a big deal when you are using things where you might need to have faster refresh rates. If I go to one of the faster refresh rates on the older technology, you see the ghosting becomes really distracting. Whereas the faster refresh rates with this GPU enabled Boox Super Refresh technology, they're still managing to remove that ghosting every single time. It's not perfect, however, and there is still an issue, and when you have large areas of color, you still see image retention in the color space here on the color screen as well. So now I'm in sort of the second fastest mode here on both of them, and you can see, I think, clearly the problem with the ghosting on the non-BSR screen. And actually it seems to be handling that ghosting within the color space there reasonably well. But perhaps you can just see, yeah, the mark there in the color space is not clearing out quite as well as it does when it's just clearing out the black and white. So if I show you now, here's the black and white drawing, go across, you see it. Without doing a full refresh, it's really removed all of that ghosting. Here on the Note Air3, there it is, still retained there on the screen. Isn't that much of an issue because you can simply swipe up from the bottom, press the refresh, won't take very long to do that, or you can just live in one of the higher quality modes and have a more frequent refresh. In the color space, you can see there's more retention of the image than there is on the white space. It's very good at clearing black from the white space, but not so good at clearing lines from areas of color, basically. So you can see here the same document in both the black and white and the color. Let's have a little look through that. I mean, is there any difference first of all in page swipe? They're both handling it perfectly well, as you'd expect with the same internals. Now, because it's just text, it isn't so distracting at all having that lack of the Boox Super Refresh. For just reading, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the black and white, in my opinion. However, if you look at a diagram like this, perhaps that does look a little bit better here on the color than it does in the black and white. I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with reading it in the black and white there. If a lot of your reading relies on diagrams, graphics, things that require color to see differences, then I think you might enjoy the color screen a little bit more. But the bigger difference, most certainly, is that sort of distraction that you get when it has to do that full screen refresh to remove the ghosting. So in reality, I'd say there is a difference, but only really for users that are going to spend a lot of time either in browsers or reading a lot of color content or using very high refresh rate apps. If you're someone that needs mainly to read wordy documents, then I think black and white will be absolutely enough for you. The one more thing about the color is that you can actually use color highlighting and you can categorize your highlights by color. You can still use that in the black and white, but of course they don't all appear to be different colors. So you can still categorize them and think of them as color, but you won't be able to see the difference on the page. And the other thing about that color screen is, of course, without any front light, the general tone, the sort of background color of the color screen is much darker than the white screen, the black and white screen. If I zoom right in on this drawing, and this drawing was made on the black and white Note Air 3, you can probably see there's a slightly crisper line here on the black and white screen. But you might also be able to see there's this graininess in the background, which is from the color array there. The 300 dot per inch thing doesn't make that much of a difference in daily use. And because generally you're running the front lights higher to sort of try and balance out that background tone, you see I still haven't got it quite as light as the Note Air 3 here. Even with those lights well above halfway, I'm going to be having another thing drawing on the battery life with the color screen. The battery life is a big deal. The battery life is going to last you in the order of 10 times longer, I would suggest, on the black and white. I don't know exactly because it's a very difficult thing to quantify, but what other reviewers have found is that generally it depends what app you are using, and that the battery life is way more hungry on the BSR enabled Boox devices, and that's why they've chosen not to include that here on the Note Air 3. That is so that they keep an option in their lineup which does have amazing battery life, and I personally think that for many of you that will lead you down the route of the Note Air 3. So if you are umming and erring between these two devices, do have a long think about how important color really is to you. If it is just a nice to have for you at this point, and you're going to spend still quite a lot of time on your large screen phone or iPad or whatever else you might be using, I would suggest stick with the black and white and enjoy not having to worry about the charging, because I am constantly managing the battery on the Boox Note Air 3 C. I would say I'd almost certainly in my use case get a full 2 weeks of use out of the Note Air 3 in just using it for notes and reading, whereas I would struggle to get more than 2 or 3 days with the color for notes and reading. And if I use a lot of apps on here, if I browse a lot, or if I use anything which is using that high refresh rate very regularly, I'd probably run out of battery in a day on this. And with all that being said, you're saving $100 to get the Note Air 3 rather than Note Air 3 C. For many of you, that'll be the final nail that seals the deal and actually lets you think, do you know what, black and white e-ink, it isn't broken, so why have they tried to fix it? And stick with the black and white. Because this Boox Note Air 3 C is a £500 tablet. To bring that down to £400 all of a sudden makes it seem a lot more affordable. For notes, there is a clear winner. For apps, there is a clear winner. That should be how you're going to make that choice. And if you are a heavy app user, then perhaps you should have gone down the route of the Tab Ultra C Pro. Having that keyboard and the mouse will certainly help you there. But as a commenter on one of my videos suggested, perhaps they have made these three devices a little bit too close together. Perhaps they could have made this device, the Note Air 3, without the BSR with the black and white screen. The Note Air 3 C, perhaps they should have left the BSR out of that and actually just had the color, had the amazing battery life. And then for people who need to use the apps and are going to really take advantage and enjoy the Boox Super Refresh technology, the way that it doesn't have to do the full screen refreshes, perhaps that would have made the most sense only here on the Tab Ultra C Pro. That would have then made it harder to differentiate between who should buy the black and white or the color, and that would have been a choice just black and white or color, cheaper or more expensive. And then if you wanted to spend the extra money and get the very best experience of e-ink, as in the way the screen is handled, then you'd go up to the Tab Ultra C Pro. It would certainly have made the distinction between the Note Air 3 C and the Tab Ultra C Pro that little bit more obvious. I hope that helps. There isn't a world of difference between these two devices. Frankly, they're both excellent.